Okay, I think we have our attendees rolling in. First, just want to welcome everyone to the 2026, right? We're in 26 performance model playbook for growth. I'm Mike Capola, CEO of Amsive, and just really appreciate everybody taking the time today. I know calendars are full. There's a lot going on. We're at that time of year where we're, ironing out budgets, putting together our playbooks and plans for the year, and really appreciate, spending some time. So before I get in, I think reflecting a little bit on last year, it really was a year as marketers that was very, very unpredictable. And in many ways, we were on uneven ground as kind of marketers, where there were some positives like inflation sort of slowing, um, tariff sort of tensions, and sort of political pressures made things, definitely more uneven, right? So when you factor that with the impact of AI and particularly the hype phase of what we're experiencing with new tools, we almost had this reactionary marketing sort of response, right? It's almost a marketing reaction to decision making. And all that, when you put it together, if you look at last year, whether brands had good years or bad years for growth as marketers, it really created a very short-term decision-making process in many ways, right? There were some pockets where there was some strong verticals of growth or brands, but there was a lot of short-term thinking. So when you move into 26 and we think about where we are this year, it's definitely feeling like more of a stabilized year, more stabilization. The Winterberry Group has come out, with their prediction in terms of our marketing economy growing about 9.5%. That's strong. Now that includes political, and about half of that would be our bump from the midterms this year, but that's still going to be a 5 to 6% growth, right? In which outpaces our expected GDP. So all things, point towards a more healthier year, less, I think, reactionary or unpredictability. We're sort of settled into this new norm. And I think what it brings up is really a little bit more where we could start thinking about mid and long term, kind of past the reactionary phase of AI. So really in the moment today, when we put that on balance and we talk to our marketers, they're being asked a lot of the same thing, right? We want you to do more with less, optimize harder, but most of all, prove ROI with confidence. And I think this year gives us the idea to think a little bit broader, think a little bit more long term. And we know from listening to our marketers and our colleagues and friends, right? A lot of this might sound familiar, but yeah, the reality is attribution. It's got a lot of noise. It's not becoming clearer. And those lower funnel channels that we've relied on, they're not more efficient. They're inherently more expensive. Like we see it in the click costs and the CPMs. And really the importance, right, is sort of risen. And we're going to talk a lot about that today with SEO and AEO and GEO and AI disruption. But it was hard to justify an in-year investment. How do I justify it? And really, literally, AI is everywhere. Everywhere we turn, right? There seems to be another tool, another product, and it's supposed to make decisions go faster, but in many ways feels slower. And I can tell you from running a performance marketing agency like day to day, it's a lot, right? The amount of tools that we license, not just for marketing, but operational tools. Every single tool's got a pitch where there's an embedded AI that needs you to pay a little bit more, right? The reality is most of that is going to be foundational to these products in the future. So we're having to deal with that noise and spending a lot of time making sure, right, that we're able to evaluate tools. So if the unlock word of the day is, let's just get some of that time back and put it to marketing. So bottom line is what we hear is there's definitely movement, people doing things. I think the problem isn't effort. The problem is really around, how we view this performance model, right? So today we're not going to talk about like a new tactic or a new channel. It's really about the operating model, right? What really sustains growth in the future? And that's a model that is one that's audience led instead of leading by channel, right? And one that really sees SEO and AEO as foundational and a very holistic sort of opportunity for brands, not just a line item that needs to be checked. And definitely one that's really prioritizing orchestration, right, across the business and moving away from isolated optimization. So that's what we're calling this 26 performance model. And today, we're going to kind of break some content on that, kind of talk about what's no longer working, right? Where leading brands and where we're seeing success in our portfolio, and really how this performance model compounds. So I'm really excited to have join me two absolute rock stars. I believe rock stars in the industry, both Lily Ray and Nina Zega, really representing two, critically important areas of the marketing ecosystem in this performance playbook. So, Lily, Ina, thanks for joining. I know you're excited about this year, but any thoughts up front, Lily, when you think about the year ahead of us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm super excited to be here and talk about all things SEO and what we call AEO, so answer engine optimization. Our team has been working really hard over the last couple of years to really pivot into understanding how large language models work, how search surfaces are shifting more towards highlighting AI generated content and generative content in general. So we have a lot of new ways of thinking about organic search, especially as it relates to
Yeah.
how consumers are really taking in information across these new platforms and how we really drive visibility, awareness, and then measure success with AI search as well. So I'm excited to be here.
Thanks. And it's all, yeah, at the forefront of the conversation. So it's definitely exciting that. Ina, what are you looking forward to this year? And I know no snow tomorrow, but
Definitely no snow, and definitely not football, but that's a webinar topic for another time. But I'm really excited to be talking to both of you, some of my favorite people. But what really kind of gets me excited about 2026 is that marketing fundamentals are really at the forefront right now. Strategy
yeah.
is really leading again, and tactics are being evaluated in the context of the bigger picture, right? So, how does what we're doing in each of these platforms really ladder up to real business outcomes? So it's not just clicks, impressions, or conversions. And in digital specifically, that shows up how we think across channels. So making decisions that reflect the full customer journey. And I know we'll get to quite a bit of that in a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's you're right. For me too, I'd echo that. Like it's what I'm excited about is there's a lot of noise when you go through this, very rapid change period that as performance marketers we're going through. We have to make that make that purposeful time. It's like to be above, right? The
Mhm.
the tools and the technology. It's exciting to be a marketer today, more so than ever before. And it's exciting for Lily, like in terms of there is no time other than today in the present to be an effective SEO marketer. The attention is there, right? So what do we do with it, as marketers to maybe make that stronger leap in investment into more of a holistic brand? So yeah, I'm super excited. I'm pumped. And yeah, let's get to it. And I think these are kind of what we're going to talk about foundationally today. I think there's five, critical themes here. One is, we're going to talk about being audience led, right? That's definitely that more holistic marketing thinking, and a little bit about, yeah, where AI has moved more to infrastructure, right? Beyond experimentation. Critical importance of first party data kind of connects to both of those in a very meaningful way. Happens to be sitting in the middle of this slide. And then really how this visibility, right, and opportunity extends, beyond search and how AI impacts that. And then kind of bringing it all together and the importance of orchestration. So I think these are our lanes, to kind of guide the discussion today. And maybe to kick it off, Ina, um, when we talk about the performance model being audience led, not particularly channel. Yeah, what does that? I guess what does it actually mean? In terms of organizing performance around audiences instead of channels.
And this is probably one of my favorite topics of discussion. So when we talk about organizing performance around audiences instead of channels, this is really when that model changes, especially when you think about the mid-funnel. And just to sort of ground this for a second, when I talk about the mid-funnel here, I'm not talking about things that are very easy to see. So low funnel for most of us is pretty clear, right? For most brands, that's remarketing, it's branded search, it's already people looking for you by name. That stuff tends to perform really well because the intent is already there. So when I say mid funnel, I'm talking about audiences who aren't raising their hand yet, people who are problem aware, category aware, maybe comparing options, but not actively searching for you. So that's the part of the journey that notoriously hard to prove. And I think we all see that. And
Yeah.
the reason isn't that it doesn't work. It's just that you can't really optimize a mid funnel the way you optimize a channel. So you can't just turn on a knob and say like, okay, now I'm doing mid funnel, right? So you actually have to design it. And that only happens when audience behavior, not channel metrics, become the organizing principle for us. So for example, if you're channel led, you end up debating attribution. If you're audience led, you can ask a much better question, which is, does this group
Right.
of people behave differently because of what we did, or would they have done this anyway? And for us, that's where the incrementality comes in. So audience first gives you the ability to test impact, right? So
Yeah.
you can do that through suppression, holdout sequencing. It's not just reporting on performance. And a really simple way to think about it is, if you talk to everyone, you're going to see results. But if you intentionally don't talk to a small portion of that audience and results stay the same, you've learned something incredibly important. And that's applicable to a lot of channels. You can't do that clearly on the channel level, but you can only do it when the audience is the
Right.
unit of measurement for you. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
It kind of like, I mean, audiences, right? It's really the core planning unit, right?
mhm,
Where I think the way we planned before, it's like we think, all right, we got to do this channel, that channel. But if you start with that audience,
mhm,
right? Now I think I like what you said before. There's a bigger insight that you're going to get, right?
mhm.
You're,
Yeah, and the other piece is that there's this other shift today. Optimization in general today is much more about exclusion than inclusion. So, the same applies to the audiences, right? So the biggest gains today for many of the marketing dollars you're putting behind platforms and channels is actually going to be more about deciding who not to include. So we've always understood this in search, like, hey, negative keywords, geographies, but audience strategy can work the same way. And this is where first party data starts to matter. Using it as a control layer, and it's what lets you sort of enforce those audience decisions across AI driven systems. So, like who gets exposed, who gets suppressed, when someone moves forward in your journey, and when they don't need to be chased anymore. So, this is where that orchestration really starts to show up more operationally and
yeah.
not just philosophically.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about both those a
Mhm.
little bit more, like the importance of first party data and just
Yeah.
how to organize. But an audience led strategy versus channel, it sort of ensures that regardless of where you are, right, we're trying to speak to that customer consistently, persistently
Mhm.
across a variety of different formats, right? Because if you don't organize that, you might be speaking to one customer in said platform as if they were unaware of the brand, and another platform as if they're already well aware and evaluating features and benefits. So you start to organize around the customer journey better, right? Rather than within channel. Now, that doesn't mean within channel, we aren't doing things that are very specific to that channel or in channel optimization behaviors. You
Mhm.
have to have that. I think what you're saying is that holistic view if you want to be more
Yep,
successful. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. And yeah, and I think where to kind of tie that off, like where teams usually struggle, I'd say is trying to make that shift, right? Because of how they're even organized internally, right? One team
Mhm.
handling this, another team. That's why it's important to kind of put audience at the center, kind of works against those silos. So 100%. Um, I think the other thing that we're seeing is definitely that AI, right? No longer a testing strategy. If you look at the data here, right? AI adoption and marketing strategy from 23 to today, like two-thirds of all marketers absolutely see some AI adoption in their strategy, right? Let alone are
Mhm.
they using a tactical piece of machine learning or AI. But we definitely moved from this experimentation phase to more of a embedded infrastructure. So I guess, Ina, how do you see that kind of happening in infrastructure right now?
Yeah, so a big shout out to the webinar we did back in July. For those of you that joined us for that one, some of this might sound a little bit familiar, but a great place to start. I think what's changed isn't the idea of AI, it's just the speed. So like back then, like just in July, well, 6 months ago, we were talking about a lot about Google's AI Max and some of their AI driven products and frameworks
Yeah,
we were putting out there to really be able to start to enable that testing. And, like at that time, AI Max was rolling out more broadly across accounts, and we were very much in that testing mode, figuring out where it worked, where it didn't, and what guardrails you needed. So fast forward to today, it's no longer really an option. So that AI Max piece is table stakes. Performance Max became table stakes, and Microsoft is actively building its own version of the same system. So the question is, shouldn't we test AI anymore? It's how do we operate in a world where AI is already embedded in how those decisions get made? So what's interesting is in those frameworks we talked about in July, they actually matter more now than less. So back then, testing felt experimental. Now testing is how you maintain control. And AI is incredibly good. I think some of you who have tested some of those tools, it's
yeah,
really, really good at scaling whatever you put in front of it. And that's powerful, but it's also risky. But, like, look, if you're with AI doesn't really fix the mess, it scales it. So if your audiences are unclear, your success metrics are unclear, if you don't design for incrementality, AI will
yeah,
optimize very, very confidently, but not always
yeah,
meaningfully. So this is
yeah.
where,
It's a great comment. Like it'll scale the mess, right?
yeah.
It'll scale the messy strategy. So I think we kind of understand, all right, AI can be a task helper, right? But moving it to more of infrastructure, yeah, that's where you can unlock a lot of right time. But if you don't have the right structure to that, or dare I say, like the human in the loop or the oversight, right, things
Or
can
manual
spiral out of control.
automation. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, automating for the sake of automating is not going to provide any marketing value. So I think one of the litmus tests is like when you get to it being infrastructure, right? If there are things that are still optional, right? That's not infrastructure. So it's like it's building a really good performance marketing practice when you're embedding AI in workflows. Like it needs to be part of the delivery where there's some really good human oversight or strategy, or it could spin out of control, or if it's optional, you're not getting the most out of the scale for that.
Mhm.
Yeah, 100%. Um, and I'd say, Lily, when you think about like where it's embedded, right? I mean, even think about the solution of SEO and AEO. It's really emerged, right? It's now no longer optional. I guess that was that statement, right? This is actually foundational to how you need to think of things. So AI has really moved, as far as our it, from a product set into really a different place today. So
Yeah.
how would you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. And I was really excited that our team was able to launch some new offerings around AEO early last year. So answer engine optimization. The way we see it and the way we've really been trying to, get to the understanding of how AI search is fundamentally different than SEO. We put out this Venn diagram to help kind of visualize a lot of those changes. One thing that's important to understand about AI search in general is that there's absolutely a lot of overlap with SEO from a tactical perspective. And the reason
Mhm.
for that is because large language models like ChatGPT and Gemini still use web search. They still go to search engines to get a lot of up-to-date factual information. So in that sense, SEO fundamentals are still essential. There's been a lot of talk around, is SEO still important? And what we're seeing in the data and the way these things work is that it's absolutely as important as ever. It really helps to position yourself within answer engines. But as far as looking at the far right side of what our AEO offering looks like, there's been a lot of evolutions as far as how brands and companies appear in AI search, very
Right.
fundamentally different than the traditional kind of like ranking and clicks and backlinks and these kind of traditional like SEO factors that we've thought about for a very long time. So now we're thinking about visibility within different large language models, thinking about your share of voice compared to competitors. Is
Yep.
your website, is your brand appearing in these answers? So we're using different tools to kind of surface that information. And then also just thinking about the fundamental nature of how people use large language models in AI search is very different than traditional keyword searching in search engines. So a lot of the way that we're pivoting is to understand these more conversational prompts and even out loud conversations that people are having with large language models, and how can we ensure that for all the very granular questions that they're asking at different stages of the funnel, how can we make sure that we have the best content to answer those questions, both on our site as well as on external
Yeah.
sites as well.
Yeah, and it's still a owned content versus influenced content play. So I think we're going to talk a lot more about like how do we win in it and what are the things we need to do. But like the idea that this is a more holistic um, solution. Like it's no longer SEO, it's SEO, AEO, and it's more multidiscipline right now. So and I think you've been doing this a long time. Years ago, right, the nomenclature in the industry has tried to change. Is it SEO? Are we doing visibility management? Are we doing these terms? And it was always getting at the same thing, is
Yep.
that it isn't always just about what's going on in the rankings, right, within search. It's really about your overall brand presence and your visibility. And I think this has been a good moment, right, where that's getting the most awareness that it's ever been. So the seat at the table that SEO has to really should have in an organization isn't in this very small silo anymore, right? It should be across multiple disciplines. Um, and I think it's just a great opportunity. So, and you've heard it all. Um, so I think in terms of this AI infrastructure, just to double tap a little bit on this, like the it's very clear that like AI is giving scale to what we would normally do on a task level or an operational level, right? But it's the assisted decisioning, right? That's a tremendous value. And I think that's a huge shift that it isn't just about executing tasks faster. It's really, I think, shortening the distance between, right, the signal or the behavior and the decision I need to make, right? And that's what is exciting about marketers, right? It's all this embedded AI within the tools, not just the generative AI assistant or thinking partner that you have. It's how it actually allows us to make decisions much faster, right? In the day to day to get back above the business, what Ina was kind of talking about earlier on, being excited about being a marketer. So um, it stops being tools that people try and start to be process and behavior. So um, I'm definitely excited about how AI can kind of move us above the business as marketers. So, there's one fundamental, very clear challenge sometimes, bad data in, bad data out. But when we think about first party data in a broader sense, not just for AI, foundation for performance, um, it's a big part of the playbook. So I guess, Ina, why, obviously we see some, performance lifts here. We know when we include really good data in our audience models, we'll see 30 to 40% lift. Um, Brands stop, vying for potential customers that are no longer. There's a lot that goes into it, but I guess why why is it the foundation for the playbook?
And this is a big one because this is something that's, accessible to, most brands, because they have their own data. It's available to them. But this is the difference is this is where first party data stops being abstract, right? It's not just a thing that exists and has to start becoming very practical. So at a high level, like I want to talk about first party data seeding. It's about using what you already know to control how you grow next. So instead of starting with channels, which is, historically been a big way that advertisers focus on, whether it's Google or Meta, or broad targeting, you start with your best customers. So the people already showing you through real behavior what value actually looks like for your business. And then that data becomes the seed. So when I say seeding, I don't mean just like uploading a list, right, into Google or Meta or any other platform. I mean, using high intent segments. So based on life cycle, stage, frequency, value, or engagement to teach platforms who they should go find more of. And at the same time, first party data is also how you optimize through exclusion. It lets you filter out users who've already converted. You suppress audiences that aren't
Yeah.
incremental and avoid chasing people who look good on paper who don't actually move the business. So instead of trying to include everyone who might be interested, you start with the people that you know matter and let the platforms expand from that signal. So from that starting point with your data and uploading and identifying your high value signals, platforms and audience tools can build lookalikes and predictive models. That expansion happens in guardrails defined by your data. And then you can overlay third party or additional contextual signals after the fact, after that sort of backbone is set. And so then you're creating this sort of closed loop model, right? So as new customers come in, their behavior feeds back into the system and then strengthens that seed over time. Right, so that's where the media actually gets smarter instead of noisier. And this is, by the way, like very flexible by industry. Like for some examples, right, for e-com, the seed is often like high LTV or repeat purchasers. And then if you do any sort of incrementality studies, because again, your audience first, it shows you which channels are creating that demand versus just harvesting it. For like B2B or SaaS, it's customers who onboard successfully or expand usage, not just leads.
Or
For
show up to an appointment
Yeah,
versus just,
exactly.
yeah,
Or like for heavily regulated businesses too, it's, their life cycle stage and frequency, which lets you, suppress some of that waste and overspending on people who have converted anyway. So
yeah,
it's different verticals, but the same principle. Like that first party data is your backbone. AI is the accelerator of it, and incrementality is how you know it's actually working. So
yeah.
yeah.
And you mentioned like the guardrails, right? There's just this very, for I think there's two things you said in there. One is if I kind of repackage, AI, it's, excuse me, the first party data is kind of foundational for the AI to learn from really well, but it's also, it's our guardrails for those AIs, right? And I think there's a when you're not when you're focused on each individual channel and you're not audience led, it's so easy to not do things like exclude audiences or include or set those guardrails because you're just chasing that performance metric. I
Mhm.
know, we looked at potential, not a client today, but someone that we were looking at that was having a lot of success, um, absolutely because of the creative and the product. But when you started to get into the actual performance metrics, you saw that there was no segmentation, right? So all these metrics were getting cluttered by repeat purchasers, and really what was driving net new ads. Like
Mhm.
that, that's then you start getting purposeful around what's my next strategy. So I think it comes back to like to your point, it's foundational. And it's also like how you set some guardrails for sure. And the
Mhm.
regulated industries, we happen to work with many. It's sort of quietly ahead of it because on a few ways because when you're when you have a business that's built on consent and trust and identity, right? You start to structure, or manage your data internally in a way that allows, right, that ecosystem channels or partners to start accessing it and using it. So in many ways, right, you're there a little bit ahead, maybe not, maybe still restricted in how you can use that data, but there's at least those guardrails that you can draw from. So if anybody is not starting with their data or doing basic segmentation, it's a huge value driver for performance. Like isolate your customers from as simple as that. Um, so a lot to do there. So Lily, just getting back to SEO and AEO, um, this visibility beyond search engines. But I
Mhm.
guess, how does that actually happen,
Yeah.
in AI? Like talk a little bit about how the search behavior is.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, as they've kind of realized that large language models like ChatGPT are increasingly effective at, answering questions throughout all stages of the consumer search journey and the funnel, essentially. Whereas before maybe it was a lot more like upper funnel information seeking type questions. Now we're seeing that AI engines like ChatGPT and Gemini and Perplexity are doing a much better job of surfacing products, transactional recommendations. And so a lot of people are kind of staying within that ecosystem to have these full funnel conversations and, to get these questions answered. So we're seeing, a lot more people getting product and brand recommendations
Mhm.
directly from ChatGPT, for example. And it's important to remember, I share this statistic a lot of the time when I give talks. While large language model usage is absolutely adoption is growing in usage rapidly, we're also seeing that people continue to use search engines like Google. And actually, Google's shared some data around the fact that these AI tools are actually additive. They're almost like expansionary on top of
Yeah.
traditional search. So, and not to mention that Google, for example, and other search engines are now embedding AI answers directly in the search results. So that's another way that people are engaging with AI. So, I think the future, what we're projecting out to see over the next few years is more and more of these not only like discovery oriented conversations, but very much like transactional conversations will take place directly in AI platforms.
Yeah, and I think it's also just changed in terms of, like, you're less focused on, you're getting the answers and you're getting the recommendations before the interaction with in terms of the click, right?
Yeah.
So I think the way you have to think about success is very different. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the past with SEO, we were very used to measuring performance based on things like rankings in search engines, share of voice within search engines, and then of course traffic and clicks, it was very
Yeah.
measurable, it's much easier, especially when we get the information directly in places like Google Search Console and Bing Webmaster Tools, we're able to kind of easily measure the performance of our efforts in terms of traffic. What's really tricky now is number one, we don't get that level of granularity from Google as it stands as it relates to AI products. We don't know how AI overviews are sending traffic. We don't know how AI mode is sending traffic. There's a lot of challenges around tracking actual traffic and visibility from things like ChatGPT. And what makes it even trickier is that a lot of these tools are basically designed to not send traffic. A
Yeah.
lot of them are designed to keep the user in the interface answering those questions. But that doesn't mean that being there is not important. It just means that measuring it presents a whole set of new challenges. So one thing that we're really interested in doing with AEO is kind of emulating like what are users seeing when they're having these conversations, which brands and products are being recommended, and how can we kind of measure how visible a certain brand is compared to competitors across different AI surfaces.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly, like measurements got to go beyond just click counts, right? And post-click conversions. So, but practically, what does that look like, right? Because you need a different set of metrics.
Yep, exactly. So we are redefining metrics as we know them in the AEO space, right? I mentioned before we were much more reliant on rankings and clicks. Now we have different tools that we're using. For example, we have Profound, we have like SEMrush, we have some new AI features within our tools. And what they do is they kind of emulate lots of different prompts that are relevant to our clients and to see how frequently, our clients and brands are being mentioned relative to competitors and kind of quantifying that. That's one way of doing it, but also just looking at how frequently large language models are visiting our websites, which pages are they visiting. So we're working with our web development team to put together some reporting about, log file analysis. So basically like redefining the experience that users are having, because now it's not just about how much traffic is coming to our site. It's really about how embedded we are in the conversations in these different LLMs. So just being able to report back on that as much as possible
Yeah.
is what we're really working on.
And it's always, I think SEOs have always had to be really good at presenting business cases, right? When it comes to budgets of clients and, internally marketers. Like how I know it's important, but, I can't, unlock the funding, right? So now with all this disruption, it's a big moment, but if it's if I kind of read between lines, if you're thinking it's click growth alone, right? That's not gonna unlock, the investment. It
Yeah.
needs to be a broader set of metrics. It's kind of what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's important to note is there's been a lot of new studies in our industry, and one thing we're absolutely seeing across the board is ChatGPT, for example, does not send a lot of traffic. If you look at the metrics and pretty much any analytics account, you're going to see ChatGPT anywhere from 0.1% to maybe 2% of your overall website traffic compared to something like Google Organic that might be 30, 40, 50%. But that's not the only thing we need to think about. We need to think about what are these conversations looking like in something like ChatGPT. For example, if ChatGPT recommends your product or recommends your brand, and then somebody goes to Google and searches for it, that's absolutely still an important consideration, right? So a lot more conversions and kind of those like deeper funnel, lower funnel conversations are happening directly in AI platforms, even if we don't see the traffic kind of account for that.
100%. I think we got a topic here is like winning. How do we, if we go back to the previous slide, um, how do you win though? Like I guess like how are we going to be successful? I think the measurement, like we said, has changed, but how are we going to be successful in terms of building that larger influence rather than click traffic stream?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the prioritization of what we work on as organic search marketers is changing, right? I would say we're much more integrated now with our social media and influencer and content teams, for example, because a lot of how you win
100%.
is
Yeah.
being the most mentioned and recommended brand across all the different places where it matters. A lot of that comes from social media, a lot of that comes from forums and from what people are talking about online. So it's not just about what you're doing on your website, it's really becoming increasingly important what people are saying about you off your website as well.
And in our conversations separately, you mentioned just the need for that to be sort of holistic, right? Because you could
Mhm.
very easily say we now need more digital PR and we need more social and we need, but everybody still needs to kind of organize around what a common goal is, and that's something that you pitched and sort of embedded in all of our team here is it's really having that common goal of here's what that influence needs to look like. So you're working across tons of teams now
Yeah.
in brands.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like with AEO, a lot of what we're doing is identifying the opportunities, using data to understand, for example, where are all the relevant publications where this brand is being or its competitors are being recommended and we're not there, right? And then it becomes a conversation with our social team, with our PR team to say,
Right.
we know that it's really important. We need to be recommended here, or we need to take ownership of this conversation that's happening about our brand and kind of chime into the conversation. So it's identifying those opportunities and then working cross channel
Yeah.
to have those
It's like
conversations.
bringing that opportunity and saying, hey, we need a better Reddit presence, but specifically with these types of goals in mind. So
Right.
how do we create a common work plan to kind of get us there? And I think the role that SEOs find themselves in is then sort of owning the metrics, right?
Hmm.
And the orchestration of that objective. So it's just a great time to be in the SEO space, and think we're still going to trip over AEO, GEO call it what it is. It's really brand presence visibility. So 100%. Um, so and also AI conversations. increasingly are becoming shoppable. We're seeing the ads, Ina. Um, give us a take and what you see.
Yeah, this is like I think we internally have like an almost twice weekly update going on in the team to see if there's been any progress or momentum with ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of these platforms of actually creating like shoppable ads there. So it's been a big topic of conversation. And, I think this really, I'm glad that Lily talked about what she did about AEO, GEO just ahead of that, because what we're clearly moving towards with AI conversations becoming transactional, but it's really important and honest to talk about where we are. So it's still something very early, and the experiences are very uneven. I think Mike, you and I actually had a whole conversation about like not the best experience of you
Nope,
getting
not
some
so good
results.
sometimes.
Yeah,
You know,
it was a little rough. We won't get too deep into it, but I
yeah. And I think
think
it's like where, hey, you're bringing in all this shoppable imagery
mhm,
from your search index. It's great. Whoa, where do
yeah.
those ads come from? Because that's not the experience I want. So it's a early ship leaving the harbor, as they say.
Yeah, and I would say where I think advertisers and brands should be focused on is the data integrity and the quality and the information they have on their site. So what's really changing and what will, I believe, eventually happen is that it's not just like having ads in those AI conversations. It's again going back to that decision-making process getting compressed. So AI is already recommending, narrowing, and this is sort of the last stage of eventually transacting, which shifts how the competition from like who bids the most to who the system trusts enough to suggest. And so
Trust enough.
yeah,
That's the
so it's
key point.
based on two things. It's like all the AEO geo work that Lily is talking about, but also from our perspective, if do have product feeds, having clean product data, data integrity, consistent
Yeah.
signals.
And that's not easy, right?
No.
It,
Yeah.
it seemingly it seems easy, product feed from an e-com site but it can be it's so it's you're saying it's definitely a place to start, right? Get those
Mhm.
trust signals up and get your, content in a much better place to allow you to be sort of more favored when we do get to this more shoppable commerce part.
Yeah, get the SEO, AEO, GEO, whatever we want to call it. Right. I mean, I think like maybe the closest approximation to think about it is something like with Amazon, where if you're advertising products on Amazon, you're doing sponsored product ads or sponsored display ads, whatever it might be. It's not, you're targeting keywords, sure, but a lot of the algorithm also relies on how well optimized your product pages
Yeah.
are and your brand pages are. And
Yeah.
that's really more of the
Because they
starting
want to
point.
make the sale, right?
Yeah, like, and especially if you're like shifting away from, manual bidding in those platforms and really focusing on automated or category, right? So like think of it the same way, but
Mhm.
ultimately, with any sort of product feed outside of just, any other sort of optimizations to make you more visible within AI, it would be just make sure your data is right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like data is foundational, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And I think I think the headline is it's early still. There's always this idea of first mover advantage, and we will test and try things as they come. But, I think a lot of the trust signals are going to play in your content, how it's organized is going to play a bigger role. I know when I love to cook and I find it a hobby to build recipes, and ChatGPT drives my brother nuts because he doesn't like that, right? But I fact check everything by doing a Google search and saying, "Are you sure it's a quarter cup of sugar that goes into that?" It can go horribly wrong. So there's still this, you know, early territory of um, pulling in paid signals feels a little aggressive today. Could change in 6 months from now for sure. Um, so bringing back to, I think a common theme is whether it was with the AEO and SEO work that really needs to kind of orchestrate across teams and disciplines, right? To how we think about an audience-led strategy. Orchestration is really is foundational for this next year's, playbook and plan. So maybe for both of you, maybe start with Ina. How does orchestration um, out? How does it contribute to performance in 26, and why is it so important?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep this one short because we've talked quite a bit about it. But when you put all of it together, right? So audience first, design, incrementality, first party data, and then AI, orchestration stops being theoretical. So, we talk so much about optimization in our space, but I think the distinction is so optimization asks like, how do I get more out of this channel? Whereas when you start shifting towards orchestration, orchestration asks like, what actually moved this audience and what didn't? So I guess the way to look at it is like when you look at optimization, optimization improves parts and orchestration really just improves systems. And that's what you're trying to create as a marketer rather than something that lives in a silo. And so
Yeah.
because AI has become a big default execution layer, we have to start thinking systematically and it's not optional anymore. So that for me is the performance advantage in 2026.
Yeah, like the technology sort of enables orchestration, but like it doesn't create it. The people need to pull that together.
Nope.
And I think fundamentally being audience led forces some of those silos. I think there was always a debate in how you organize marketing teams and or agencies around specialists in this area, or especially you have your this channel here, that channel there. And as much as there were gains from that system, I think the market's been pretty clear, right? That really fights against, what really is driving performance. Like we need more holistic ownership across the system, and it definitely um, will unlock a lot of performance. Lily, any thoughts on this in terms of orchestration and its importance?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a long time, like performance marketing was about optimizing individual channels, right? So like SEO teams were hyper focused on rankings and email teams were hyper focused on open rates, for example. But now it's like the consumer journey doesn't really only live in one channel.
Yeah.
Optimizing for one channel ignores how consumer decisions are actually made nowadays. So, we talked before about needing to work cross channel, and I think that that's just becoming increasingly important because people are discovering brands across many different points of the search journey across many different channels and platforms. And we're definitely finding, with our AEO offerings, we're working much more cross departmental than we used to be just because we can't think in isolation. It's not just about one specific place where people are learning about our clients. There's many different stages of that process. And so we need to make sure that we're working with not only, content teams, but also like, paid teams to get a lot of like search query behavior, analytics and
Yeah.
data because we don't necessarily have that as much on the organic side. And we're also working with influencer and PR teams to get our message out there more. So I think orchestrations become increasingly
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, and definitely, and you covered that a lot, but like to be effective in the role and where SEO and A is going, it's forcing this ability to collaborate and coordinate. Doesn't mean we always have to own everything, but we have to own the orchestration or the
Mhm.
goals of that. It wasn't long ago, right, where, SEOs were trying to get a seat at the table at, the early part of building a website. Right now, everybody knows that, right? Or most, right? It's like you would be, of course, right? But there was a fight to be part of that conversation, and it feels like I wouldn't say it's gloves off now. It's different, but it's a similar struggle to ensure that that happens. And I think a lot of what's supportive of that is making sure that there's leadership alignment, right? Your partners out there, your agencies, your um, external partners need to, not work in fiefdom, but they should be put together with separate conversations. But it's definitely from leadership alignment, to, I would also say, cultural accountability, right? We're no longer defined in this age of AI-driven marketing of, at least this is more definitely a personal thing that I've been speaking about. You're no longer defined by how many people report to you and what your span of control is, and it's more about like how you affect the outcomes, right? And so AEO, role of AEO affects a tremendous outcome, but touches a lot of things. And for Ina, the performance part, right? It's operating and having different channels that, operate separately and be measured differently. It's not going to unlock that next level of performance. It has to orchestrate together, or we're going to waste a lot of money, right? Our consumers, like Lily said, it's a complex journey. They're in many different places and many of them similar, right? It's a meta user versus a Reddit user. They're many of them overlap in both. So we want to speak to them consistently, persistently. So orchestration, it makes the individual channels performance better done right, but it's definitely not easy. It's hard and it's a skill that marketing teams need to learn. And part of it is, getting that alignment up top, but breaking down fiefdoms and making sure that people are rallied around common goals. So huge ability for it to work well. So to wrap up, playbooks for really the year, what did we talk about? Definitely leading with audiences starts to break down those silos right away, fundamentally, and also is where our clients and our potential prospects, right, out there, they want to be spoken to like that. Treat AI as infrastructure, right, not just task enablement, and absolutely get the first party data. And if we are not thinking in our evolution of SEO, if we're thinking still just site clicks and site performance behaviors, it's beyond that. It's more holistic. And in order to do it, orchestrate around the full life cycle of either, your AEO goals or your performance marketing objectives. I think these are the foundations to be really successful next year. Any closing thoughts, Ina or Lily? I think we got a couple of questions.
I mean, I would say like, as far as this whole space, things are moving really, really fast, obviously. Things are changing every day. We don't always have the answers because things are moving so quickly. So, for example, in the e-commerce space, now we have a whole new set of considerations from Google. Google just announced what's called the Universal Commerce Protocol. So there's like different
Mhm.
types of feeds that e-commerce sites need to start thinking about. We didn't even know about that 2 weeks ago, right? So like things are just moving so quickly. So I do think like it's important to stay nimble because every day we have new developments, new things we need to action on. We also don't know how the lay of the land is going to look as far as which LLMs people are using in 6 months or a year. So just, stay on your toes because what's true today might not be true in 6 months.
Absolutely. Um, I got a couple of questions. One on AEO. It's a very competitive market out there. I'm going to summarize this question. Um, where, our business financial service competing against some much larger institutions, right, where they have more scale. What, so for Lily, if I shorten that to like, if you had to prioritize, right, the most important things as it relates to content or strategy to be successful,
Mm-hmm.
right? What would those things be? And particularly thinking that through someone that might not be, right, the market leader, more of a challenger brand or
Yeah.
mid-size,
Yeah, I
firm.
mean, I noticed this question talks about like, if you are a community bank serving 3 counties in Illinois, how do you compete with the big players? So, what's interesting and actually useful about the way that LLMs like ChatGPT are trending over time, and also Google's AI products, is that they're becoming increasingly personalized. Even when you don't ask for a specific location, or you don't ask for maybe a specific need that you have, because of the context and the memory that these large language models have about you, generally speaking, they're becoming much more personalized. So that includes location, and that includes, the customer's specific needs. So by answering specific questions that your ideal customer has as clearly as possible on your website, and all the different considerations about your products, everything that makes you unique, who's your leadership team, why should people trust you, like having all of that laid out very clearly can help encourage LLMs to pick you,
Yeah.
when they know that somebody's really in market for like your specific
In
offerings.
that particular
Yeah, and
micro
especially,
geography.
yeah, especially for location. So, the fact that you are a community bank with three counties is actually helpful, because somebody who's really a potential customer for you in that region is much more likely to see you as a recommended bank.
Yeah, maybe getting into the national, uh, mortgage market, not so much. But when it comes to local, and I'd say Lily also like the influence that the local graph, and I'd say particularly with Google's AI, but that local graph and local listing citations is becoming even more critical and even
Hmm.
more regionalized, which could be a whole other webinar, but that's
Yeah.
a huge place of focus for
Yeah,
product.
if you ask ChatGPT, assuming you're logged in and you have, memory turned on, if you ask ChatGPT a generic question, in many cases it's going to answer by saying, these are your options in Brooklyn, New York, even if you didn't ask about Brooklyn. So I think that's a trend that we'll see be more and more true across AI search over time.
Yeah. And one more question. We're coming up on the hour. Um, Ina, first party data, I understand it's critical, but ours is not perfect. Where should what's sort of the first place somebody should start so they can get something actionable and some performance improvements? So
Yeah.
yeah,
I'll try to keep this one brief because I think we get stuck in analysis paralysis often with like, is this great? Is this perfect? And I would just say, don't wait for perfect data. Start with things that reduce waste, right? So anything like, for example, like as simple as if you have a branded keyword search active and you know that you have a retention strategy in place, maybe exclude people who are visiting, who are searching, who've already engaged with you in some way, upload that data. Or for, sequencing, right? So like, people have engaged with, um, maybe a certain promotion if you're e-com, maybe put them on a different audience list and serve them with something different. So these are all forms of exclusion, and often exclusion is the easiest way to start using first
yeah,
data.
I think that's a great suggestion. It's like, I think, just and we've talked about this a lot, like getting to like do audits and things of other accounts, and you're shocked that the excluding existing customers or excluding um, not like past customers that with low net promoter score, right?
Mhm.
They're not, unless there's a conscious win back strategy, why would we want to continue to serve them advertising? So these are like basic marketing principles, but the idea of just taking that list and feeding it to all the different channels and platforms reduces waste kind of
Mhm.
overnight. So
Yeah.
there are some like small motions that
Yeah,
start with customer,
exactly.
not customer, or bad prior customer that
Yeah,
can make a big difference before we get the
exactly.
really good segmentation or building models off of who we've understood as our best LTV based
Mhm.
customers for this particular product set over time. More
Yeah, so
power.
like usable data today will beat out any imperfect data that just never gets activated.
I love it. Great, great quote to kind of close our webinar. So Uh, appreciate everybody spending the time. We are available. If there was one or two more questions that came in we didn't get to, happy to follow up. But there's a QR code here. Reach out. We'd love to talk with whatever marketers have challenges, whether it's AEO, orchestration, we just want to provide some value. So appreciate everybody spending the hour. Hopefully you got something out of it, and talk to you soon. Ina, Lily, thank you.
Thank you all so